Spicer, a DC-based attorney and expert on cosmetic regulation, supply chain, sustainability, all that good stuff. She's coming to the chat to answer some listener questions. So a little bit of background. Maggie's CV is a mix of beauty and also law. It includes Amazon Web Services, where she focused on supply chain regulatory compliance, and Mothership Materials, a tech-powered ingredient company that upcycles discarded food processing waste for personal care products, where she serves as the Director of Sustainability and Supply Chain. 2 years ago, Maggie put her experience in law and beauty together, and she opened Source Beauty, a DC law firm that helps beauty and personal care brands with environmental compliance, including sustainability and human rights issues, which we know are so tough to tackle. Maggie, welcome.
Thank you, Lexi. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay, me too. I'm glad we get to do this. I feel like I've loved our conversations in the past. But before we start, tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing nowadays at Source Beauty.
Yes, so it's a really exciting time to be in this space because I feel like in the last 10, 15 years, our industry has just gone through this major overhaul where, it started with clean beauty, then it kind of moved to green, and consumers have really just started demanding such a higher level of not just performance and efficacy, but also operational excellence from brands. They want to see that brands are really putting a lot of thought and innovation into the products they're developing, the sustainability behind how they operate as a brand. And it's really exciting because I think it forces us as an industry to also evolve. And where I kind of sit is taking this background in being a supply chain attorney where, I spent years in Canadian lumber yards and Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing plants. And I spent so much time in tech that I got a firsthand experience in understanding how things are made and these complex supply chains that really bring together all these ingredients on product and packaging. And there's so much behind the scenes that goes into the products that we use every day. And where I now sit is taking all of that background and helping brands understand their supply chains, really find ways of becoming best in class to source ingredients that might have an innovative application, but are also better for the planet, and designing packaging that is more sustainable and maybe is focused on circularity, which I'm sure we'll get into. So, taking all this experience and bringing it to beauty and really just helping brands compete in this new market that we're sitting in, which is really exciting. Very, it changes really fast, but I think you probably have seen this over time. Consumers are just always looking for the next best thing, and they're no longer willing to say, okay, well, this worked 5 years ago. I'll take it at face value today. They're constantly demanding more.
Yeah, and you are so right about this whole shift in visibility, because I feel like 5-10 years ago, nobody thought about supply chains. Nobody was thinking about where their products came from. It was like the product supply chain started when we purchased an item, and it ended when we were done with it. And that's and it's not, necessarily bad. It's just that's just what the sentiment was. So it really is this new world. Well, we only have 30 minutes, so let's go ahead and dive in. Today, we have a listener Q&A for you all. We'll get started with a few of our questions, but please raise your hand, and we'll get some of your questions in the mix as well. We'd love to welcome you to our digital stage. Okay, so Maggie, I'm going to get us started here. This is sort of a general one, but what would you say sort of are the biggest hurdles facing beauty brands right now when it comes to environmental compliance?
I think the biggest hurdles are really just, first off, identifying where are you facing challenges and what can you realistically achieve better standards in. So when it comes to environmental compliance, maybe we can take a step back and break down what that means as it relates to beauty. So this could be packaging, which is always the number one topic of sustainability for our industry. We create a lot of waste. We use a lot of plastic, and there are new regulations happening, not just in the United States, but around the world that are targeting plastic waste. So brands are really trying to engage, not just from a product perspective, but also from a regulatory compliance perspective. If California is saying that we need to have a certain amount of PCR, post-consumer recycled resin, in our packaging, well, now it's not just a design decision. Now we have to do it as a brand. So you've got packaging, you have marketing, and this is another big one, especially as an attorney that I'm constantly talking about, is the types of green claims or sustainability claims that you make about your products and your packaging. These claims can be environmental performance on the ingredients, on the packaging materials, on your brand as a whole. And this is really where we see this phenomenon of greenwashing. And then on the flip side, we have green hushing, where brands are now so scared about consumer backlash to them making marketing claims about their products that they don't want to say anything, which is not what we want as an industry. So there's this really fine line between not greenwashing, but also not green hushing. And then where the conversation is now starting to go, which I'm really, really excited about, because this to me is like the next stage in environmental compliance and in sustainability and social impact. It's on ingredients. For so long, clean beauty and green beauty was just focused on safety. It was just focused on ecotoxicity. All these retailers had clean beauty lists of ingredients they didn't want to see. But we weren't really talking about the environmental and social issues that are so closely intertwined with a lot of the ingredients we use in everyday products. So now we're seeing this really holistic understanding of, when it comes to environmental compliance, it's not just about the package, it's not just about the ingredients, it's about everything. And so, there's a lot of challenges in that, but there's also a lot of opportunity. And I think having these types of conversations is so great because it gives us a chance to really break down those individual pieces and highlight where we as an industry can go and what brands can be doing to really set themselves apart.
Maggie, thank you so much for that. Really appreciative. I think that's very informative. I'm very curious myself in terms of legal precedents. Are there any cases, whether they're settled or ongoing in the U.S., that you can kind of point to that illustrate some of the importance of environmental compliance?
Yes, absolutely. So the first one, there's two. The first one was just dismissed, and this was the class action lawsuit that was filed against Sephora. And this was, we call it a clean washing. It wasn't greenwashing, it was clean washing. There was a class action lawsuit filed against Sephora for their Clean at Sephora standard. And consumers had said that the standard was misleading. Sephora is obviously, one of the biggest global beauty retailers, and especially in the United States, their clean standard is one of the biggest retail selections that you can get. So this was really the first time that the U.S. court system was kind of pushing Sephora to say, like, okay, well, consumers have said that they feel misled because certain ingredients were included in products that were labeled as clean, and consumers were saying that clean should meet the dictionary definition, which means no synthetics, none of these ingredients. And what Sephora said was, well, we developed our own standard. We were very transparent about it. At no point did we say that there were no synthetics, and we established the parameters, and all of our brands met these parameters. And in fact, a judge agreed, and they said, we don't think Sephora misled anybody. The reason this is so interesting, and the reason this conversation is not over, this is very much just the beginning of the conversation, is that retailers in beauty act as pseudo-regulators. Because regulatory agencies in the U.S. do tend to move very slowly, retailers are essentially acting in this void as the people who are setting the standards in the market. And so while we don't have definitions from the government about what clean means, especially in beauty, retailers are now setting their own definitions. So it gives us this question of, is it time that we have a clear standardized definition of clean? Because in the absence of that, retailers will step in and do it themselves, which can mislead consumers. This ties into the environmental piece because we're still also defining terms on the environmental side. So what does it mean to be sustainable? What does it mean to have recyclable packaging? You would think these are pretty straightforward, but they're really not. And so the Sephora case demonstrates kind of the intersection that we're currently at as an industry of consumers have been demanding more clarity. Retailers have stepped in the absence of regulatory standards, but now regulatory agencies are getting more pressure to actually go ahead and set these standards. So more on that to come. And then the second class action is a case against Colgate. this gets to packaging recyclability, which, I was telling Lexi earlier, this is like the number one topic when it comes to sustainability for beauty. Colgate had developed this innovative tube for toothpaste that they were marketing under Colgate and under Tom's of Maine. And it was using a highly recyclable material called HDPE number 2. And if you think of like a milk jug, that is an item that is, you can recycle it anywhere in the country. That milk jug is made of HDPE number 2. So Colgate created this very innovative, very sustainably focused program where they made tubes out of that material. And they said, great, it's recyclable. Go ahead and recycle it, because tubes are very hard to recycle. The problem, and this is what the class action was about, is that consumers pointed out that there are very few facilities in the US that actually recycle tubes. And it doesn't matter what they're made of. MRFs, the material recovery facilities, don't want them. And there's contamination because of all that gunk left in the tube. Nobody, I don't know about you, but nobody seems to be able to get toothpaste out of the tube at the very end. So Colgate's now in this weird position where they've created something that's technically recyclable. It has a recyclable material, but the design format is not recyclable. And as an industry, this design question is the next frontier of what we're going to be facing in terms of sustainability and recyclability, because we have small dropper bottles, we have pumps in bottles, and we have squeeze tube, we have all these formats that are so difficult to recycle. So the next, stage in innovation is going to be, how do we design for the capacity that our country currently has in terms of recyclability? So those are the two cases that I feel like are really setting the stage right now, especially in the US.
Wow. Is the Colgate one ongoing?
It is. So fingers crossed.
Okay.
That again is going to move very slowly, but it will be interesting to see the conversation around that.
Wow. Hearing you talk about this, like, we really are at the beginning of so much of the precedent that's, being set, and that will impact so much, if not the entire industry.
Yes.
I think, like, in terms of right now, greenwashing is obviously a big topic. And I have to admit, I had never heard the term green hushing before.
Yes.
So thank you for bringing that to my attention. But in terms of greenwashing, and then, on the other side, green hushing, how can brands sort of avoid the greenwashing marketing trap, but also sort of beat the fear tied to green hushing? How do they find that middle ground?
Yes. It's a middle ground is a perfect way to describe it. Getting your marketing claims right as a brand is this very delicate dance. And I think brands should take comfort in the fact that no one's really perfect in this space. You see Colgate getting in trouble, you see little brands getting in trouble. Everybody's kind of struggling right now. And I feel like there are all these tools and standards right now that are just kind of hitting the market, and we're really starting to get sophisticated as an industry. And so one of the biggest processes that I develop with brands is, let's go through your product portfolio. Let's understand it's not just a marketing exercise. It's really, what have you developed? What is your plan as a business? Are you trying to talk to, an 18-year-old on TikTok? Or are you focused on a 40-year-old woman who's maybe she's looking for higher performance, a higher price point, but she's shopping in person? The marketing claims that you make, and this is true, across the board, the marketing claims you make need to be tailored, not just for your product, but for your audience. And the way that you develop a marketing claim on sustainability is no different. So maybe you use something like a QR code on your package if you're focused on an in-store consumer. Or maybe you have, I think of Crave Beauty because they do such a great job integrating tech, really using social media to bring their audience in to understand the sustainability around their products and packaging. So there are all these tools that are out there, and I feel like it's just about developing a process to engage, not just treating it as like a siloed, we'll send it to our marketing team or we'll hope the packaging designer gets it right. Take a step back and really say, like, how do we capture the most value from what we're doing on sustainability, and how do we integrate that across our entire brand? To me, that approach, it doesn't take a lot to get it going, but once you do, it just creates this flywheel of momentum where you can integrate it across your marketing for performance, for efficacy, and for environmental performance. And it just gives you a nice foundation to make green claims in a really responsible way, where you hopefully have mitigated the risk of, greenwashing allegations or consumers just feeling like they're being misled and they don't really know how to engage with you as a brand.
Mm, that makes sense. I feel like a more holistic approach also allows brands to be able to say more, as opposed to, I feel like it's those short snippets that get brands in trouble a lot.
Yes. And it's a great opportunity for brands. Honestly, I find that a lot of these conversations really do develop consumer trust and loyalty. And I mean, that's what makes consumers come back for repeat purchases. It's not that they saw something that they liked once. It's that they felt really bought into the brand and that brand's journey, and finding ways of communicating with your customer base and bringing them along as a process, as opposed to saying like, oh, we're sustainable from day one and that's it. Nobody really buys into that message. It's probably not true. And it doesn't really show consumers that you're willing to engage with them, versus a brand that says like, hey, we're trying to tackle this one particular sustainability challenge. We're going to show you every couple of weeks. Like, we're going to give you a little background on, we're talking to our packaging designers. Now we're at Lux Pack in New York, finding innovative materials. Like, there's so much opportunity to really draw consumers in. And I feel like finding the value in this can be such a great opportunity, rather than just being like, oh my God, I don't know how to make these claims. I'm just not going to do it. Or I'll just do what everybody else does and hope I don't get in trouble.
That's a great tip too. It's like, it's not a binary. It's not like you're totally sustainable or you're totally don't care. It's like, look at this piece of our journey and sharing it with the brand or with the audience.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah. So I know we've talked a lot on the site at Glossy about MOCRA, about EU greenwashing regulation, New Zealand's PFAS ban, California's PFAS ban. They're just, I mean, this kind of goes back to what you were saying a minute ago, but there's so much going on. How are brands supposed to keep track?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is something where big brands struggle with it, little brands struggle. Everybody struggles with it. And I think this is just part of the landscape of doing business in a global economy, is that you have lots of different regulatory standards, and they're quickly evolving, and they're not just on one area. It's not just ingredients, it's packaging, it's sustainability, it's social impact. And so I think brands should hopefully start feeling more comfortable engaging in this area, because it's not enough to just focus on product development and then marketing it, and then you launch in a market that maybe you didn't assess, because the risk of doing that is so great that it really doesn't make sense anymore as a business to ignore these pieces. So what I always tell brands is, figure out what does the next 18 months look like? Where's your expansion plan? What retailers are you trying to launch into? And working back from that, finding partners to help you translate whatever those markets or retailers dictate into your business planning. And sometimes that's working like people like myself or some of the colleagues that I also refer people out to. It's integrating with your contract manufacturer or your packaging designer. Like, those are your operative partners, and they are the ones who are going to help you as a brand founder understand the risks and opportunities in all of these markets. I think the one thing I will always tell brands is like, don't try to go it alone. There's nobody that could build a brand and grow and try to do all of this themselves. So give yourself the space to focus on the big picture of the brand, the product, the innovation, and let other people come in and help you. Because it's only when you really build a team that can support you that you're able to grow a business and really scale it at the pace and scale that you want.
That's an excellent point, Maggie. Thank you. I want to remind our audience that if anyone has questions, feel free to, request to speak. And when, Maggie's done, then we'll sort of intro you in, and then you can ask your own question. But in the meantime, Maggie, I would be curious to know, so California routinely outpaces both the FDA and EPA when it comes to regulation. So what's on your radar right now from the Golden State?
There are a few regulatory issues that I feel like California always is the first in class in the U.S. So things like packaging sustainability. There's this movement that kind of happened in the EU that has now come into the U.S. called extended producer responsibility. And this is really focused on, assigning responsibility and building systems to deal with packaging waste. So this is something that is going to affect our industry and is really being led by California. There's also a piece of legislation in California called SB 343, which is their truth in labeling law. And this is focused specifically on when a brand can say that they have a piece of packaging that is recyclable. And this is a big topic right now because obviously recyclability of beauty packaging is a huge challenge. And California has gone beyond what the green guides have done. So to level set really quickly, the green guides are the guidelines for the use of environmental marketing claims in the United States. The FTC puts them out. They are not in and of themselves enforceable, but they are kind of like the federal standard for how to not mislead consumers when you're talking about your environmental performance. And they have a standard for when you can say that something is recyclable. What California is doing is taking that standard and going beyond and really focusing on this problem of when something is actually recyclable versus theoretically recyclable. And this is exactly what happened in that Colgate case that I mentioned. It doesn't matter in California's mind under this new law whether something is made of 100% recyclable material. If the state of California cannot actually recycle it, if the capacity of their facilities doesn't accept tubes, for example, you cannot call that tube recyclable. So this is a big shift and is going to significantly alter the landscape of what we can call recyclable material in beauty. So there's all this stuff happening at the state legislature, and regulatory happens slow at the federal level. It happens slightly faster at the state level. But then I feel like this in the background, and it's not getting nearly as much attention, is all these class action lawsuits. And this is what I'm more concerned about from a legal and partnership perspective for my clients, because consumer class action lawsuits don't need to wait for new regulations. A consumer group or a plaintiff class can come together and sue a retailer like Sephora, a brand, or any combination of the above to focus on some of these issues around, well, I felt misled. I paid more as a consumer for this product because you told me it was sustainable. So because I felt misled, I'm now going to sue you to change your behavior. That happens today. We're not waiting on regulations to happen. Like, that happens today. And so when brands come to me and they say, well, we're not really worried about this piece of regulation because we don't think, it's going to happen for another year or two, they completely miss the boat on, oh my God, like, we can be sued at any point in time. And California is it's like the hotbed of consumer class action litigation. So there's really this kind of like tidal wave of consumer pressure, both happening from the regulatory side, but also from class actions that make California a very special place for our industry, and certainly the one like kind of setting the bar in terms of how we think about these issues.
Wow, that's so interesting. I live in California, and I have so many friends who work in beauty and wellness, and I hear about these lawsuits. They're not just the ones you see in the trades and in the headlines. Like, they are happening to people all across the board around all kinds of things.
Yep.
Do you have, this may be kind of like a funny question, but Maggie, do you have any tech or software that you recommend to brands to sort of stay organized in their compliant endeavors?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I feel like there is this burgeoning corner of the beauty market, especially on the operations side, where tech is really emerging as this, I can't say one-stop shop because they all really specialize in different pieces, but tech is the like unsung hero of brands' evolution, and being able to not just be compliant with regulatory standards, but also to build in a way that maybe aligns with retailer standards or sustainability initiatives. So where I see that kind of starting is really as brands are engaging in supply chain visibility. And this could be, we just want to know where our ingredients are coming from, to we want to know what the safety standards are around these ingredients. For so long, there's been a lot of, it's just like a brick wall. Brands don't know anything about the ingredients they're getting, the packaging materials that their suppliers are using. And so where a lot of these tech platforms are trying to go is like, how do we bridge that? Like, how do we get you the information that you need? And it's really important, not just from a, we want to build a better product perspective, but there are a number of tech platforms now that are doing work on things like palm oil traceability. That's a great case study because the EU has this new regulation, the EU deforestation regulation, that is massively increasing the standard of due diligence for responsible palm. And brands have very little in their kind of wheelhouse in order to meet that standard. It used to just be, we're roundtable on sustainable palm oil certified, we're good to go. That's no longer the case. And so there are tech platforms now that are building even like satellite imagery to help you know where your palm's coming from. It's really cool. So without, rattling off a list of the tech companies that are out there, I think it's helpful for brands to know it's very much like a tailored approach. So typically when I work with brands, like we'll kind of plan out what are your big issues, then we'll try to fit these platforms in on the back end. Because, when you get bought into a system, it really does integrate into your whole operation. So it's really important to make sure that you're taking the time to think about what you need and how you're going to build with it, because a lot of them are quite all encompassing. So there's a lot happening on the tech front. I think it's really exciting.
Maggie, I love that you talked a little bit about supply chain. I think when we are talking about business, supply chain is so key to growing and scaling a brand. Where do you see the biggest issues brands are facing in supply chain right now?
I honestly think it's about ingredient traceability. When we, 10 years ago, I think the supply chain issues were, how do I get materials faster? And especially because of COVID, there was so much more development on building really robust supply chain systems. So we have a faster speed to market. We have better access to upstream packaging suppliers, material suppliers. Then we started focusing on the safety of ingredients. Now where we're at is brands are liable for so many supply chain issues that honestly, I don't think a lot of them are really aware of. And there's a lot of opportunity there too, to get a better handle on where your materials are coming from. And maybe that's developing, systems to source from biotech companies that are doing sustainable synthetics. And that's going to give you not only the performance that you want, but it might also help you with your environmental impact. Sometimes these synthetics are significantly better from an environmental standpoint than a natural. But then on the natural front, say you're sourcing a surfactant. So you need something that's going to, give you a nice lather and a body wash. And so you're sourcing a surfactant. Well, it turns out your contract manufacturer was using a surfactant that's derived from palm oil. And if you're selling into the EU market, you actually need to know whether that surfactant was responsibly sourced. So ingredients to me are really like this next stage of supply chain systems are there. They're meant to facilitate the movement of goods. The way brands engage with it, your supply chain can be super high level, super low touch, or it can be like we're fully in it and we have all this traceability. To me, this is the biggest opportunity, is like getting in the weeds of your supply chain, building a better mousetrap, and finding ways of essentially cornering the market. I mean, if you're in your supply chain, you have more business resiliency to understand what's going into your product, how you can shift as the market shifts, and how you can keep yourself compliant from regulatory risks, either in the US or overseas. So to me, that's like the biggest challenge, but also one of the biggest opportunities, especially when it comes to supply chains.
Wow, that's so fascinating, so informative. So for brands that maybe are a little bit freaked out right now because of the onslaught of all the regulation and consumer awareness and just like this like mounting stuff that's happening, I interviewed one founder, spoke to her a few months ago, Amy Liu from Tower 28, and she told me that she was, wanting to get ahead of MOCRA, wanting to get ahead of this other stuff. So she hired a full-time business forensics compliance expert to help her brand full-time for a few weeks, just to make sure that they were 110% in compliance. Obviously, we talked a little bit about, for a brand, how it's best practice to kind of build your team. Is this something that you recommend to any brands?
I definitely do. And I think this is what's really interesting about how our industry has kind of evolved, is there's this really kind of cool trend, and I'm part of it, and I honestly didn't know about it when I first launched my business, of executives positioning themselves as fractional. And I kind of thought, okay, well, when people go off on their own, they build their own businesses, they're consultants or they're advisors, but this positioning a fractional is really fascinating to me. So with some of the companies that I work with, I come in as a fractional sustainability, like chief sustainability officer. And that goes beyond what I would do as a consultant, where I'd just be kind of giving top level advice. I'd be answering questions, go off and you do it yourself, where I will actually kind of integrate into the company, help them either build their strategy or implement the one that they already have, build more substantive systems rather than just giving kind of top line advice. But I'm not coming in full time. And that I feel like is really important, because these issues are so complex and they move so quickly that you want somebody who's spending the time they're not doing working for you is engaging with other companies, so they have really wide visibility on the industry and all of these different issues as they evolve. It gives you a much broader kind of perspective, and it also means that the systems that can be used, and you've kind of seen different case studies, as opposed to like, okay, well, I'm fully integrated in your system, I have no idea what other people are doing. So frankly, I think it gives you the benefit of accessing experts that are just too expensive, or otherwise you don't need it. So you want that kind of mobility without feeling like, okay, I have to build a team of 30 so that I have 4 regulatory experts and 2 sustainability people. Like, most brands can't support it, and they don't need to. So I think Amy's built an amazing company, and I'm not surprised that she's identified the need for that type of kind of expert support, where you kind of come in, SWAT team, build something up, and then the brand can take it away and implement it themselves.
Yeah, and it must be like so much peace of mind as well. It's like, I think that brand founders and executives and retailers, they put this pressure on themselves that they need to know everything or have everything perfect. But like, we're kind of in the Wild West a bit of this, which I know is a dumb expression, but
no, I totally agree. I mean, gosh, I hear Wild West once a month, especially when it comes to green claims. Everybody's like, well, there's no standards, but there kind of are, and there's a lot of pressure on getting them right. So I like the fact that brand founders especially are starting to recognize, like, I don't have to be the monolith. I can be the person guiding the ship, and I bring people on if and when necessary. They build me up where I need, and then I go find somebody. Like, that's the way you keep the brand moving forward, as opposed to like, okay, I need to stop and become a sustainability expert in the next 4 weeks. Like, you've got too much to do. There's too much on your plate. It doesn't make sense. So I feel like the modern brand founder is the center of a very big table of experts.
Yeah, definitely. We're a little over, but we have one question here. I think I did this right. Oh, yes. Hi. Please introduce yourself and your question for Maggie.
And you know what? I think you might be muted. There we go.
Yes. Hi, this is Ashwini. I have been working in regulatory and compliance for 15 plus years and, specializing in the cosmetic industry. My question to Maggie is, for the new startup brands, definitely we see bigger claims, and we just recently talked about the clean, lawsuit at Sephora. And yes, they do have definitions. The pseudo regulators retailers do have their own definitions, like for having a clean label and all of that. But then my question to you is, what is the FDA's point of view, or like, how is their market surveillance when it comes to these claims, which they don't define? Do they even have any market surveillance, or do they just look at it when there are like, adverse event or a customer complaint, I would say?
So it's a good question, and it's a little complicated, because the FDA, like when we're talking about MOCRA, the FDA is really going to be, the enforcing agency when you're talking about things like adverse event and you're worried about complaints under safety. The FTC, on the flip side, and this is really where I live, the FTC is who is going to be looking at environmental marketing claims. So they're the ones who put out the green guides. They're the ones who will open an enforcement action against a brand that's making misleading claims. And I feel like this is where brands get a little confused, because you have the FTC who's looking at your claims, not just your environmental marketing claims, but also, when you have an influencer who's making claims on your behalf, if you're making performance claims, the FTC is looking at what you're saying to consumers, but then the FDA is also involved in terms of the actual safety and like the material that you're using, and they're enforcing MOCRA. So there's this interesting juxtaposition. I'm not sure I can give you a short answer to that question, but the FDA and the FTC kind of surveil the industry differently, but they both have at least one stream where brands kind of tattle on each other a little bit. And so they will get informal complaints from brands saying like, hey, my competitor is saying this, or I think my competitor is doing this and you should investigate on safety. That's not the only stream, and that's not like a preferred way to get information, but it definitely exists. And so, saying, oh, well, everybody else in the market is engaging in this behavior is not a good enough protection for either the FDA or the FTC, because they're both going to be looking at what brands are doing and what they're saying and what consumers are saying in terms of the use and the marketing of their products.
Yes, that does make sense. And yes, I would say that most of the bigger conglomerates and well-known brands are, kind of under the radar when you compare it to the smaller brands. But definitely it's a good awareness for the smaller brands if they want to be completely compliant and, gain the confidence of the consumers. I think it's necessary to know the FTC/FDA requirements, I would say, right?
Yep, totally agree.
No problem. Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ashwini. This was such a great conversation. Maggie, thank you so much for taking time to come on and talk to everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, I hope if brands and anybody else on the call takes one thing away, it's that obviously this is a very quickly changing area, and there's a lot of challenge. There's a lot of really complicated problems to kind of unravel, but there's so much opportunity and there's so much room to innovate. And I think the brands that are willing to just get in there and get messy and pull in the right, experts and people who will help them build, they're the ones that are going to succeed and really future-proof their businesses. So I hope people feel optimistic about all the opportunities that are out there, as well as, an awareness of the challenges.
Definitely. And this was so informative, and you have such a great POV and such great tips. So appreciative. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in today. We'll have another talk next week at the same time. And please stay tuned on Glossy, because we have a lot of really great Earth Month coverage, including some more content around compliance and regulation. And that will all be leading up to Earth Day next week. And we'll see you again next week. Thanks so much for tuning in.